As part of Fáilte Ireland's suite of supports and resources on HR for the reopening, this short video will give you an understanding of the employer's role and proactive steps to ensure a safe place of work. These are considerations for a business reopening in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's video, we're going to cover the legislative background. We're going to consider the practical steps to be taken. We're going to consider the policies that we need to implement at this time. We're also going to consider managing absence and any other HR or employee issues. And we're also going to look at other considerations. So first, let's look at the legislative background. The employer's responsibilities in relation to COVID-19 are underpinned in the Health and Welfare at Work Act and the responsibility employers have to make the workplace as safe as possible. There are also further legal obligations and potential liabilities associated with things like duty of care, GDPR, and other considerations. So it's important to ensure we're very proactive at putting in place the safe mechanisms to facilitate an employee to return to work. Remember, employees also have responsibilities under this legislation to ensure they do all they can to adhere to the policies and protocols that you've introduced. So once you've trained them in this regard, it's important that you make them aware of the breach of policy implications because it is a very serious consequence for employees to do so. Let's look at the employer obligations in this regard. The first obligation is to provide a safe place of work. This safe place of work is to ensure we've done a risk assessment, which we will cover in more detail in the health and safety video, to ensure that you've identified all risks that are potentially available and we reduce or eliminate those risks accordingly. It's also important to have a duty to those that are vulnerable within our workplace. These include those with underlying health conditions, those that are pregnant, or those that may have other concerns associated with reasonable accommodation. It's important to engage with these employees and also get medical advice to assist you in making your decision in relation to what you need to do to reasonably accommodate employees at this critical time from a health and safety perspective. Remember, you also, as an employer, have vicarious liability, which is an obligation to proactively act and in the interest of the employee and to protect them accordingly. We also have a moral employer obligation to proactively try and do all we can to work with employees at the moment to try and ensure this place of work is going to be as safe as possible in this high risk time. The next area we're going to look at is the importance of reviewing your policies at this time. The first policy to consider is your COVID-19 or coronavirus policy. We would have advised in our last set of videos that you would put in place a coronavirus policy for all staff when this pandemic commenced. It is now advised that you would update this policy in line with the return to work protocol and also in line with the new obligations employees have in relation to following these guidelines. It's also important to consider your sick policy to see if that requires review or amendment, for example, in relation to reporting any interaction an employee has had with somebody who has symptoms or being in touch with somebody who has been confirmed with the virus. We also look at remote working at this time because there is some roles within the business that remote working might be practical for it to continue. Annual leave is an important consideration also because it's important that during this time we still encourage employees to get rest and recuperation and bring their holiday balance up to date. We're finding a lot of employees don't want to take holidays at this time, and the worry for you is you'll have a big holiday balance at the end of the year if you don't proactively manage your holidays now. So that's an important consideration. It's also important to look at other flexible working arrangements. So you may need to revisit employee shift patterns. You may need to reduce employee hours. You may need them to work at different times in different departments, etc. So it's important to revisit your flexibility clause within your current staff handbook and also update that policy accordingly. Finally, the other policies that are worth review and consideration at this time is your layoff and redundancy policy. It is hoped that once the business reopens, we won't need to lay any people off further during the season, but nobody knows at this stage. It's also important, in line with your business restructure or your business strategy, that you may need to revisit your organizational design and roles accordingly. That may involve specific roles being made redundant. If that is the case, it's important that you have a detailed policy in place that you follow and employees are aware of if this were to occur. The next area we're going to look at is managing absence. We are very concerned at the moment in relation to people's return to work. So it is advisable that you would engage early with your employees to identify their intent in terms of return. Even if you only have a date that is expected in terms of return at the moment, start that engagement process early for those that have been on layoff or who haven't been at work for some time. Once you get their intent in terms of returning, let's then identify how you're going to manage any absence issues in that regard. These are some examples of where this may become an issue. First, let's look at vulnerable employees. If an employee has an underlying health condition, remember we have an obligation to do all we can to look after that employee in line with reasonable accommodation. It's also important to remember not alone should we get an update from their doctor in relation to their likely return or any steps we need to take in the business to manage their return, but it's also important that you would get your company doctor to give you a medical opinion in line with that job the person does and also advise in relation to their return. Once you have this, it's important that you consult with that employee so that you show that you've done all you can to achieve a reasonable and practicable outcome in line with your obligations. The next consideration might be employees with vulnerable relatives in their home and their concerns associated with returning as a consequence of that. Again, it's important that if that occurs, we get a likely return to date from that employee. Obviously, a lot of employees are concerned, and we appreciate that concern is very real. However, it is a very long time in the future before it's likely a vaccine or the virus will be gone completely. So it's important we get an understanding from the employee as to what their intent is in terms of return. Another consideration in relation to absence is managing childcare. The childcare facilities have a date in terms of return. Hopefully, schools also have a date in terms of return. So, again, we need to get an indication from people what is feasible in terms of their return and try and work with them to identify if there are hours they can work that meet the business requirements, yet being flexible to address employees' needs in this regard. And finally, you may have reluctant employees. So, employees who may want to stay on the COVID payment, for example, and not return to work. If this is the case, we need to ensure that all of these areas get a paper trail so that you write to the employee, confirm the date that you expect them to return, and confirm that the COVID payment will finish on that date because their layoff has completed at that stage. If the employee at that stage outlines why they're not in a position to return, we then need to discuss the options with them. But once you have work available for them on that date, at that stage, they need to return. So, other considerations that are worthy of you reviewing at this stage are remote working. We've been encouraged to facilitate remote working as long as possible. So, if there are roles that remote working is working positively and proactively, it's important we try and continue that for those roles. If remote working is only working ad hoc and it's not working very well, it's important we give very good feedback to the employees as early as possible in relation to improvements that we need to see to facilitate remote working continuing for a longer period of time. Another consideration is the crucial importance of communication right throughout these times. And the sooner we engage in that communication process, the better. And the importance of proactively doing that is also crucially important. Remember, even if you have no news for employees, it's better to communicate proactively with them than not, because they're conscious and anxious and they're worried about their job. So, reassurance, even if it's a case that we've no further update, is important at this time. It's also important to consider that you are stressed and all your employees are stressed and anxious at this time also. It's important we acknowledge that and try and take all appropriate measures to help support people at this time. Employee well-being is crucial to that. So initiatives like checking in with employees, even if they are on layoff, or giving employees times that they can contact the business while the business is closed with any queries that they have is encouraged. And again, other initiatives like tea breaks, Zoom calls, etc., to keep that connectedness is very proactive and positive also at this time. And finally, the Employee Assistance Programme that is supported with Fall to Ireland. Please make your staff aware of the Employee Assistance Programme that is in place. And you may also have an Employee Assistance Programme in place within your own business also. All of these initiatives are trying to help keep the employee motivated and positively connected with you at this difficult time. The FAQ to support this video is located here on the Fall to Ireland website. I hope you found this video useful and thank you for listening.